Part 3, Chapter 1
of To Let. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Minter. The Forsyte Saga. 3. To Let by John Galsworthy.
Part 3, Chapter 1 Old Jolyon Walks. Twofold impulse had made Jolyon say to his wife at breakfast, "Let's go up to Lord's." Wanted something to abate the anxiety in which those two had lived during the 60 hours since John had brought Fleur down. Wanted, too, that which might assuage the pangs of memory in one who knew he might lose them any day. 58 years ago Jolyon had become an Eton boy, for old Jolyon's whim had been that he should be canonized at the greatest possible expense. Year after year he had gone to Lord's from Stanhope Gate with a father whose youth in the 1820s had been passed without polish in the game of cricket. Old Jolyon would speak quite openly of swipes, full tosses, half and three-quarter balls, and young Jolyon, with the guileless snobbery of youth, had trembled lest his sire should be overheard. Only in this supreme matter of cricket he had been nervous, for his father, in Crimean whiskers then, had ever impressed him as the beau ideal. Though never canonized himself, old Jolyon's natural fastidiousness and balance had saved him from the errors of the vulgar. How delicious, after howling in a top hat and a sweltering heat, to go home with his father in a hansom cab, bathe, dress, and forth to the Disunion Club, to dine off whitebait, cutlets, and a tart, and go, two swells, old and young, in lavender kid gloves, to the opera or play. And on Sunday, when the match was over and his top hat duly broken, down with his father in a special hansom to the Crown and Sceptre and the terrace above the river, the golden 60s, when the world was simple, dandies glamorous, democracy not born, and the books of White Melville coming thick and fast. A generation later, with his own boy, Jolly, Harrow buttonholed with cornflowers, by old Jolyon's whim his grandson had been canonized at a trifle less expense. Again Jolyon had experienced the heat and counter-passions of the day, and come back to the cool and strawberry beds of Robin Hill, and billiards after dinner, his boy making the most heartbreaking flukes and trying to seem languid and grown up. Those 2 days each year he and his son had been alone together in the world, one on each side, and democracy just born. And so he had unearthed a grey top hat, borrowed a tiny bit of light blue ribbon from Irene, and gingerly, keeping cool by car and train and taxi, had reached Lord's ground. There, beside her in a lawn-coloured frock with narrow black edges, he had watched the game, and felt the old thrill stir within him. When Soames passed, the day was spoiled. Irene's face was distorted by compression of the lips. No good to go on sitting here with Soames, or perhaps his daughter, recurring in front of them, like decimals. And he said, "Well, dear, if you've had enough, let's go." That evening Jolyon felt exhausted. Not wanting her to see him thus, he waited till she had begun to play, and stole off to the little study. He opened the long window for air, and the door that he might still hear her music drifting in, and, settled in his father's old armchair, closed his eyes, with his head against the worn brown leather. Like that passage of the César Franck sonata, so had been his life with her, a divine third movement. And now this business of John's, this bad business. Drifted to the edge of consciousness, he hardly knew if it were in sleep that he smelled the scent of a cigar, and seemed to see his father in the blackness before his closed eyes. That shape formed, went, and formed again, as if in the very chair where he himself was sitting. He saw his father, black-coated, with knees crossed, glasses balanced between thumb and finger, saw the big white moustaches and the deep eyes looking up below a dome of forehead and seeming to search his own, seeming to speak. Are you facing it, Joe? It's for you to decide. She's only a woman." Ah, how well he knew his father in that phrase, how all the Victorian age came up with it. And his answer: "No, I've funked it. Funked hurting her and John and myself. I've got a heart. I've funked it." But the old eyes, so much older, so much younger than his own, kept at it. "It's your wife, your son, your past. Tackle it, my boy." Was it a message from walking spirit, or but the instinct of his sire living on within him? And again came that scent of cigar smoke from the old saturated leather. Well, he would tackle it, write to John and put the whole thing down in black and white. And suddenly he breathed with difficulty, with a sense of suffocation, as if his heart were swollen. He got up and went out into the air. The stars were very bright. He passed along the terrace, round the corner of the house, till through the window of the music-room he could see Irene at the piano, with lamplight falling on her powdery hair. Withdrawn into herself she seemed, her dark eyes staring straight before her, her hands idle. Jolyon saw her raise those hands and clasp them over her breast. "It's John with her," he thought, "all John. I'm dying out of her. It's natural." And, careful not to be seen, he stole back. Next day, after a bad night, he sat down to his task. He wrote, with difficulty and many erasures: "My dearest boy, you are old enough to understand how very difficult it is for elders to give themselves away to their young, especially when, like your mother and myself, though I shall never think of her as anything but young, their hearts are altogether set on him to whom they must confess. I cannot say we are conscious of having sinned exactly. People in real life very seldom are, I believe. But most persons would say we had, and at all events our conduct, righteous or not, has found us out. The truth is, my dear, we both have pasts, which it is now my task to make known to you, because they so grievously and deeply affect your future. Many, very many years ago, as far back indeed as 1883, when she was only 20, your mother had the great and lasting misfortune to make an unhappy marriage. No, not with me, John. Without money of her own, and with only a stepmother closely related to Jezebel, she was very unhappy in her home life. It was Fleur's father that she married, my cousin, Soames Forsyte. He had pursued her very tenaciously, and to do him justice, was deeply in love with her. Within a week she knew the fearful mistake she had made. It was not his fault, it was her error of judgment, her misfortune. So far, Jolyon had kept some semblance of irony, but now his subject carried him away. "John, I want to explain to you, if I can, and it's very hard, how it is that an unhappy marriage such as this can so easily come about. You will, of course, say, if she didn't really love him, how could she ever have married him? You would be right, if it were not for one or two rather terrible considerations. From this initial mistake of hers, all the subsequent trouble, sorrow, and tragedy have come. And so I must make it clear to you if I can. You see, John, in those days, and even to this day, indeed, I don't see, for all the talk of enlightenment, how it can well be otherwise. Most girls are married ignorant of the sexual side of life. Even if they know what it means, they have not experienced it. That's the crux. It's this actual lack of experience, whatever verbal knowledge they have, which makes all the difference and all the trouble. In a vast number of marriages, and your mother's was one, girls are not and cannot be certain whether they love the man they marry or not. They do not know until after that act of union which makes the reality of marriage. Now, in many cases, perhaps in most doubtful cases, this act cements and strengthens the attachment. But in other cases, and your mother's was one, it is a revelation of mistake, a destruction of such attraction as there was. There is nothing more tragic in a woman's life than such a revelation, growing daily, nightly clearer. Coarse-grained and unthinking people or act to laugh at such a